So we'll give it a little bit and we'll start our little conversation about tuition and raising tuition. And I have everyone on mute just so that way we can make sure that gives us the ability to share with you the information. And you're welcome to use the chat. And also, obviously, if you have a question, we want you to, pop in and ask a question, but we'll definitely have time for all of that as well. So just give it a bit, and thank you so much for all of you that are joining us.
One thing I'm going to do just right while we're waiting, I'm going to go ahead and share the Facebook group for the Know Your Numbers course in here. And I probably have to share it a few more times, but in this group, there is a few templates that we had uploaded that give like sample letters to send parents for raising rates. I think there's like 3 or 4 different ones, some really straightforward, some basically like proving out why you have to raise, why you're raising your rates so substantially. And so if you want to grab those templates, you can go ahead and click in and request to join that group. Yeah, and I think actually when we've talked about this in the past while we're kind of waiting for people to get on, I think one of the more interesting, although never quite like 100% answered questions that come up is like, how much do I really need to like tell parents, like, do I need to like give them a reason why I'm raising rates, or can I tell them I'm just raising rates and they don't need to know? And I think, both methods are valid. But me personally, like, I know when we raise our rates, I always like to kind of point out like, hey, this is because we want to be able to pay the best people, and we need to be able to provide health insurance, and we need, to be able to, and, QuickBooks is raising their rates by 50% as they always do. And I do like to point those kind of things out when I am doing my own rate raises, whether they're necessary. I don't know, that's to be, that's kind of everybody's personal preference. But I just find it, I don't know, like when people push back, I kind of feel like I have a little bit more to be like, okay, well, we can't afford to keep doing it at this rate. So because of all these reasons I gave you, so here's where you can go that will give you these things at a much, at a cheaper rate.
Exactly. And that's a perfect segue into the whole concept of why raising rates. And part of it is, understanding the market value. And sometimes you do have to kind of like point that stuff out to parents. Like a lot of parents don't have any really, unless they're sitting there with their little camera, they're not really understanding what's going on in their child's day to day. They don't understand what level of preparation has been put into making healthy foods, available and accommodating to all of the dietary restrictions. So, sometimes you do have to kind of smile
how much you have to pay people in order to keep the same staff, because that's another huge, kind of red flag for parents, is if their child is going to a center and there's constantly a different teacher, different staff that they're interacting with, that does tend to put parents off. But it does cost money and I mean, obviously culture plays a big part of it, but you do have to pay people a reasonable amount in order to keep them there and to like maintain that steady staff. And I think that, again, that's worth pointing out to parents when you're talking about
consistency is so important. And, it's definitely, it's just going to create this domino effect, because when you have consistent staff that the kids are trusting, and you have happy kids, you have happy parents, and parents don't want to be going around trying to find alternative care. They don't want to be spending that time like it's that whole, like, it's tough to find, it's circular, you know, it is hard. And you recognize that, to, like you said, retaining the best, there is a cost, and sometimes you have to use the big boy words, you know, the non-educational, like, you have to be that business mindset. So I'm glad you have those templates available, because that will absolutely help answer all those questions.
Exactly. And then I don't know if they have the same view that I do, but when you go in there, they'll have, you know, like the Know Your Numbers online course, like the discussion rooms members, and you can find them very quickly under files.
And I just approved 2. So you're going to get instant approval if you click through the link. And that Know Your Numbers will absolutely tie into the information that we're going to present with you tonight. We have worked very hard, Honest Buck, headed by Rochelle, recognizing that the education is so important, put together all of this so that way it was readily available for you, so you could learn at your own pace. So this group is going to be a great way to have other like minds and other entrepreneurs like yourselves that are working and to understand everything. So you'll have this nice little social network too that can connect, that is getting the same information, and you all can learn from each other. So, all right. And with that, I guess that kind of like just kicks us right in there. So Rochelle, I know I did a little, did some research and putting together some of this. So I think we have to understand the whole concept of why this is so important. So please share.
I mean, the truth is, you know, I saw a news report that was talking about how the average childcare center has a 1% profit margin. And that's the average. And when we think about the fact that on top of already having what is considered an extremely low profit margin, we've seen the costs rise for our teachers, how much we have to pay our teachers to keep good teachers. We've seen the more and more requests for health insurance. We have seen our food costs rise. We have seen our normal, daily supplies rise. And depending on, your situation, you may be seeing your rent go up. You may be, if you're on a variable mortgage, like I know a few people are, you're seeing those interest rates go up. So really, like, everything is going up right now. And I know that that's not news to anybody, but what we're what we're mostly going to be talking about tonight is how to figure out what your true costs are, so that you know what to charge parents in order to make whatever profit margin you're looking for. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And I think that that's a big thing, because I know, when I speak with potential clients as far as, what's going on, and the most common is like, I don't really know what it is. I check my bank account, and as long as it's still, in the plus sign, we're good to go. So I must be doing all right. And it's when you understand the numbers and how they impact, it does make a better difference, because as we know, COVID kind of smacked us all in the face, and we were left with a very stone hard reality. So the understanding that is good to know, especially with that. So, with COVID, go ahead. I know you're gonna. Oh, okay. So with COVID, we found that, a lot of centers were hit with the reality that even though there was no income, that business had to stop, the expenses still had to go, especially when you're talking about rent, when you're talking about a lot of these things that, salaries. So could you go ahead and, I guess, explain a little bit about the differences about between the fixed expenses and the variable?
Yeah, so the way that we will calculate this is going to be, we have to separate our fixed expenses from our variable expenses. So our fixed expenses are those things that stay the same no matter how many kids we have. So that can be rent, that can be, liability insurance, that can be utilities, although sometimes those can kind of go up and down depending on season or depending on use, but for the most part these are the kinds of things that no matter how many kids you have, those won't significantly change. Whereas variable costs are the costs that go up or down depending on the number of students that you have. So obviously the big one there is salary. We know we have to stay in ratio. In order to open another classroom, we have to, bring on another teacher or two usually. And those are kind of the big, I would call like giant steps. Like when we're calculating it, we're going to look at how much we're paying salary per, per child essentially, but we don't necessarily pay like an eighth of a teacher, you know what I mean? So
Yeah.
Those are going to be things that hit in big steps. But then there's the things that literally are based on how many kids we have at that exact time, like food costs, supply costs, those sorts of things. And that's the reason we have to look at this, is because there's sort of this idea in our head that no matter, if we just enroll 10 more kids at, $300 a week, that's $3,000 more a week. Well, yes, but no, there's going to be those expenses that come along with it. And we have to understand what that looks like so we know how much to price in order to get to the profit that we need to be able to support ourselves.
Exactly. The domino effect, you have, plus 3 kids, you're going to have, you have that ratio of, additional expenses. So basically what you're saying is we have to separate these expenses between the ones that are fixed first, because we have to know how much we have to bring in first just to cover those expenses. And that is that's what we need to base tuition off of, is what do we have a cost of.
Right. Exactly. And that's really just to like extrapolate on that point a little bit, like it's really easy and extremely understandable and comforting to price based off of your neighbor and what your neighbor is pricing at. But really, your first thing you're looking at needs to be, what are your costs and how much do you need to bring in order to cover those costs plus bring in the profit, in order to bring in the profit that you need. And I can understand where if your costs are significantly higher and you would have to price significantly higher than your neighbor, there would be that tendency to not want to do it. But the issue is, like, your neighbor, unless your neighbor has no rent, your neighbor's costs really probably are not significantly different than yours. And keeping your prices artificially low is a race to the bottom, is what it is.
Ooh, that's a really good quote. Put that one up on the wall. That's very important, because when I was doing, and when I was doing the research with this whole understanding, it is a thing, like, we forget about that whole concept of, like, our own relation, like our own rent, our own stuff. Like, if we're not working, we still have these expenses. So how are we making that up? And so knowing what we have to bring in every day, or every month, is crucial. So you were talking about your neighbors having, pricing it based off of your neighbor, and that is that's comparing apples to apples. And so when you do have those situations, I'm assuming, where you're like, you really want to price it close to what your neighbors have, you may have to step up what we were initially talking in the beginning, your market value points, you know, the things that you're doing that parents don't realize, the whole fact, like you might have hired a nutritionist and what that impacts. And so you're talking about spelling out those.
And I'm going to
points.
actually, now that we've got a few more people in here, I'm going to repost the Facebook group, because there is, if you look in the files that's in the Know Your Numbers online course, there's actually a really great one, and it's called like under the files called J for K 2021 New Rates e-packet. And that one, it is a lot, but I mean, I don't even have kids, and I was almost sold. Like, I want my kid to go here. Like, they, you know, not only is it like, hey, we've implemented this and this, and we've done this and we've done this, but like, here is our neighbors. Here's what we have, and here's what they don't have.
Yeah.
Which is incredible. Yeah.
Yeah. It's no different than like if you go to try to compare plans with like your cell phone, you know, your cell phone plan, they're going to spell out all the things that they provide, and then, you know, very quietly, you know, oh, this Red V company doesn't have this value. And sometimes, yeah, you know, you do have to highlight what you do have and the fact that other places don't. You know, you're not
you have a food program, right? Yeah. Do you have a food program and your neighbors don't? Do you know, support potty training and your neighbors don't? Do you have, you know, after school pickup and your neighbor, you know, those are things to definitely highlight, because it's not always clear to parents.
Value added
like
benefits.
Right, exactly.
Anything that's really going to help the parent, ideally in the end, to save time, is going to be a huge aspect of income for you. They're going to absolutely, you know, the more services that you offer, yes, as you know, the variable costs will go up, but that's where it comes into understanding like what those value added benefits would give you. Like, would it increase the retention of your same kids year after year until they have to leave, you know? So, and I think that's, everybody wants longevity, because that's just continuous. You know, that's continuous referrals. That's just continuous. Kids have that consistent social group that they will be seeing in schools. Kids will have the consistent teachers in their lives that, you know, and as we know, when you have that community, when you have that small village, that in and of itself, it's very hard to find that. And so sometimes you have to create that, and making sure that all of your families know that that is, you know, the intent. It's definitely going to help out. So thank you. That's awesome. It's great information. So I'm excited that we have people that are taking advantage of the information that you've provided there. So let's talk about some different selling points. So if some of you that are joining us are looking to understand, you know, what are some things? Because sometimes, you know, we don't see it like as a value, because we're like, well, duh, this is just, of course, this is what we should have. You know, what we often, where Rochelle was mentioning was, you know, nutritious meals and snacks, you know, extended care. You know, not every parent works an 8-hour day. You know, how flexible are your hours? What kind of transportation are you providing? You know, those are all value added benefits that parents don't quite understand, that like, yeah, I'm taking your kid here to this, so you don't have to. And it's going to promote this. Those are things that they do need to hear. And it's also like, what kind of parent involvement? You know, do you have a good, strong parent team that, you know, is excited to also have their kids there? I think is important. So let's talk about the competitor selling points. So the, you know, we're talking about, and also I do want to let everybody know we are recording this, so we will, you know, have this available later, and we will have more information emailed to you at the end as well. So we will be recirculating that. Thank you, David, and welcome to everyone that has joined us. So this is basically, we're getting ready to discuss a little bit more about the competitor selling points. So like, you know, what makes you stand out, and like, what are the other factors that, families are considering when they're choosing. And so understanding that the location, so when you recognize that this is how you can also look at your competitors' selling points. What are some of the things that everybody else is, kind of do to kind of get that gauge of the competition, what makes you stand out from them. So like your staff ratio. So like Rochelle was saying, of course, with the domino effect of, opening up a new room, yeah, that might give you an extra $3,000, but it's also increasing the costs of that. So the ratio, you were talking about how we can figure out that, I think. So it was with when you're adding another classroom, like figuring out the break-even point, and then we're talking about the variable costs. So getting back to, because that's going to tie in at the end of how to calculate the break-even point. So we understand our fixed costs every month are the rent and, insurance, and some other fixed costs you have are your salaried employees. So then we also have our variable costs of so think about some of those. So how do we figure out that? So as far as when we use this calculation of the break-even point. So how do we come to that variable cost?
So it's going to depend on what the student to teacher ratio has to be. So let's say we're in a classroom where we have to have 2 teachers for 10 students. Okay. What we're going to do is we're going to look at their salaries, and then the salaries of those teachers to be there during the times that you're open. And then what I will always do is multiply that by 7.65%, because that is the Social Security and Medicare that you're going to pay on those employees, guaranteed. So, let's say the cost for those teachers for the month, or for the week, or however you want to calculate it. It really depends on what your billing schedule is, like how you want to calculate this. If you're a weekly biller, you want to do this by the week. If you're a monthly biller, you want to do it by the month. But let's say it's going to cost us $3,000, for the month for those teachers. And so what I'll do is I'll multiply 3,000 times 1.0765 to add in the Social Security and Medicare, and that's $3,229 that I'm going to pay them. I'm just making up numbers. I don't know if that's even I'm not even sure if that's minimum wage, but anyway, and then we can multiply them.
Don't hold us to that.
Yeah, don't, just numbers, divided by 10 students, essentially that's $323 per student that's going to increase. But again, that one's a little bit harder, because obviously, even if you only have 5 students, you're still going to pay that same amount, unless for whatever reason in your state it's a 5-to-1 ratio or whatever that looks like, Okay. And so you really have to know okay, how many kids am I reasonably going to have that I can bring on? How many teachers do I need in order for that to happen? But basically, if you're looking at overall, what your cost per child is, you'll want to look at what the max number of kids are and divide it by how much you're going to pay.
The stars. Yeah. And so then that gives you your cost per child, correct? Is that correct? Basically your variable cost?
That's your cost per child for the payroll side of things. But then you have to remember you got to add in the food, and you got to add in the supplies. And so those really, to get to those numbers, a little bit more straightforward. They're not hard numbers, they're squishy. A lot of accounting is an art and not a science.
Another good one to put on the wall.
Yeah. So basically if you're looking for how much are you paying for food per student, you would take your food cost for the month and divide by the average FTE that you have during that month in order to get to what we would expect. that the incremental next cost would be. And you would want
Gotcha.
to take out things like, obviously you wouldn't need, if you have a kitchen, if you have somebody cooking, you don't need to add in an extra cost. Like, you're not going to hire another chef in there.
Yeah.
It's just the food that you're looking at.
Gotcha. So, and basically when you were saying the FTE, you're referring to the full-time equivalency, correct? So that was from a previous webinar that I think we do still have available. We can post that in that Know Your Numbers course too. So
Yeah,
can
but
you
essentially,
remind everybody what that file was, that just to,
it was the 2022 rate increase packet. Yeah, J4K 2021 new rates e-packet PDF. And it's under the files.
I'm gonna pin that puppy. So it's pinned up there, that post, the original post that you had done. So that'll make it easier for everyone to find it. And this is the Know Your Numbers e-course group. And so just to let you know, it's obviously going to be this small social group of other like-minded people that are, in the childcare industry that are interested in learning a little bit more about these KPIs. And if you don't know what that is, this group is going to help you out with that. But we're getting to setting tuition. And so we've discussed the fact that, tuition is, first step, we need to understand how much it costs us to run the house. And so we need to have that as a main number that we understand. So the other thing that we talked about was understanding our value added benefits, the items that we'd have to remind parents about, like, hey, this one here is, we've got these nutritious meals, we've got extended daycare. So we're talking about trying to help also figure out the market value, correct? And the competition. So all of this kind of comes together, and trying to identify too with the local market is it varies, because obviously you can't just charge what the state of Arkansas if you have a population that doesn't need it as much. So can you kind of expand a little bit on the whole, like, what is it looking like as kind of like, I guess, a trend? Because I know I have information from that we'll post here later, information regarding the childcare prices across the country and like how they vary. And I'm like looking at this map and I'm oh my gosh, I want to post this real quick. I'm gonna figure that out and try to do two things at once. But basically it is a actual website by the Department of Labor that was put out by the Child Care. Found it. Hold on, yay, copy link, paste. So this is where I got the map that I was looking at. That was just kind of astounding. So can you discuss a little bit more about the trends as far as what the market is looking like? Because this data is obviously considerably older because it was dated pre, COVID.
Well, I mean, and I think states can have, I mean, we can talk about like childcare prices by states, but honestly, it seems like prices are even go deeper than that. If we're looking at, like, let's say Washington, for example, we have a client in Seattle who charges $3,200 a month and is constantly full. Could wow. Somebody in Spokane, Washington charge that? Probably not. And that's something, it's really hard to talk about the pricing because it does vary so much. And that's one thing when people are like, well, what should I be pricing? I can't tell you, because again, if you're in Seattle, if you're in San Francisco, if you're in Washington, D.C., if you're in Massachusetts, if you're in New York City, you're going to see very different prices than you are if you're in South Carolina or Florida or Punxsutawney, Pennsylvania, yeah. Like those are all going to be very, very different things. overall, what I will say though, because I do have a client in South Carolina, and I looked at her rates, or when we looked at her rates for the first time, she was charging 175 per week. And I was like, I don't care where you are. You should not be charging less than 250 a week. Like, there's just no way for you to be able to provide quality childcare for that little amount. So, I mean, I think we do have to consider like essentially our census data. I mean, obviously, like I said, people in Scottsdale, Arizona can charge a lot more than people in Little Rock, Arkansas can, based on census data, based on how much a parent makes in that area. But I do recommend looking at that information. I'm sure most of you kind of know what is typical in your area. But again, it just kind of comes back to, we really need to focus on our costs before we focus on, we can definitely bring the norms in, but our costs have to be the first thing that we're thinking about.
Good deal. So this will help them also kind of like understand that background. So we're going to go ahead and jump back into the whole calculating the break-even point, so that way we can understand how we price. So I know you've done this before with this, calculating the break-even point has been a popular topic, because many don't understand how to figure that out. And we'll have this worksheet available for everyone to see and use. That's going to be in the handout that you'll get afterwards. But calculating the break-even point is understanding first your fixed costs, right? And then what do we do with that? Why is that? Like, why you say that's important with understanding income? So what do we need to do then with our fixed costs, so we can understand then what that break-even point looks like? That is taking all of those fixed costs and dividing it, like you said, by those number of children, and that is your break-even point. So now what are we doing to help us figure out the income now that we've got our break-even point?
Can you word that a different way?
Yes, I can. Sorry. So we were talking about the fixed costs and like what are, figuring out our variable costs. So we have our fixed costs, and then we've got to take that and divide that by the number of kids, the number of the variable costs, and that is what is considered our break-even point, correct?
Well, we have to include we are including our variable costs in there, correct? Because at the very least, we have to have some kids in there in order for that income to come through. But then we have the expenses that come with those kids. So.
Okay. So how are we using this break-even point? How are we using this information to calculate our income? So how do we figure out that tuition? How do we use that? What can you advise rather on a way? I'm definitely not saying this correctly. In understanding the tuition and how to raise the prices. And you said understanding the break even, understanding our fixed costs and how that relates, our expenses, and understanding that. How are we using that to calculate our tuition and what that bump is? So I think that's where it's like expanding on that, like, okay, now we've got all these expenses that are increasing because of inflation, and we need to raise our rates, but we can't price it based off of the market. We can't price it based off of the comparator. We have to base it off our costs. So
okay,
that was a long way to get there.
Let's run through kind of, I guess, an example, because I can't really just talk around it.
Okay.
It really kind of has to be done as an example. So like, let's just take really high level stuff here. Let's see. So am I able to share my screen here? Nope, I am not.
All right, hold on. Go ahead.
Okay, so we're just going to look at my calculator here really quick. So let's say very, very high level, we have $20,000 in fixed expenses every single month. That can be our rent, that can be our insurance, that can be our utilities, all of those things. And so basically, and let's say we have, so we know we have to have $20,000 in minimum income in order to just cover that. But then let's say our tuition is $1,000 a month. And let's say that our cost per care per kid is $300 a month. So basically, what we have to do is figure out how many kids do we need in order to cover both the $20,000 plus the $300 that's going to come with every single child that we bring on.
Gotcha. Okay. Okay. And so that is, go ahead.
So I don't know if you already have the calculation for that, like ready.
Nope, I don't. I should have.
Okay.
Let's see here. We got 3,000. I'm sorry, 20,000, right?
Yeah, we got 20,000 in fixed cost, and then let's say our cost per child is 300. Let me see if I can do this a little bit better way. Okay. So I think I have in my
66.66 or 67.
How did you do that?
I took the 20,000 and then I divided that by the 300 and I got 66.66666. It's a big calculator, so it's, you know, it's got that running.
Okay. So if we do that, like, so let's say you said 66 kids?
66, yeah, 66 and 2/3.
Okay, well, let's just say
67.
66 kids, and we do that, we multiply that by 1,000. So that would be $66,000 in revenue that comes through, minus our $20,000 cost, and divide that by 66. I don't think that's quite right.
We got to do math. See, this is why I got to bring out my worksheet here. So hold on, let me see if I can share that.
Okay.
I know I had it right there. All right, let's open this puppy. All right. It's getting there. All right, so and we can do screen. There we go. Oh man, I shouldn't have opened it like that. Hold on. No, we can't open it from a PDF because that's, or open a PDF as a Zoom. So that's just not how it works. So let me get this right here. All right. Do hard things. Okay. I want to page 7, I think is.
Okay, so I'm going to copy and paste the calculation here into here. So the break-even point in units is the fixed costs divided by the sale price per unit less the variable costs. So if we're looking at, you know, again, going back to our example where we have, yep, there we go, perfect.
I knew I could do hard things.
So yeah, if we're looking at the cost of one child for one full day per month, so I think we said that was what, like $300. $300 a month.
Mhm.
And then,
That came out to 66.67.
okay. And then our total costs were 20,000.
Mhm.
And so divided by 666. So it's coming up with 30 kids. So if we do 30 kids, so if we kind of check our math again, so we do 30 kids times $1,000 per month, that's 30,000 minus our $20,000 in fixed costs.
Mhm.
That leaves the 10,000, divide that by the 30 kids that we got, and sure enough, that's the 333. So we know, yep, so so in this calculation, the cost per one child per month, that first one is the 1,000. I would probably call that revenue, because
This one right here?
variable cost, yeah, cost and variable cost are confusing to me. So the first one would be $1,000 per month. The variable cost would be $300 per month.
I was hoping I could, let me see if I can. So this here, nope, it's not gonna, well, whatever, it's not gonna let me. All right, so this one, I can't put in the numbers here. But you said this was the $300.
No,
I'm sorry,
1,000, because yeah, it's confusing. It's saying cost instead of revenue. And
okay, so we'll get that fixed then too.
Yeah, so there's 1,000 less the $300 in variable cost. So that A would be 700.
Okay.
And then our total fixed costs per month are 20,000. And we divide it by the 700 that we came up with. So that's 28.57. And that would be what our break-even point is for the kids. Like,
so basically we need at least 28.57 kids just to cover our costs of 28.57 kids.
Right. Everything essentially above that, assuming all things remain equal, everything above that should lead to more profitability. But again, it's not going to be $1,000 in profitability per kid. It's going to be $700 in profitability.
So knowing how many you have to cover those amount that you enroll is more important, just so that way you know you've got to cover those at least. And then everything else, yeah, you'll have the variable costs, but you'll also have that steady increase of income as well, or profitability, as you said.
Correct. Exactly.
Perfect.
So that's what's needed to know. That's what you need to know in order to know what your price needs to be. Because if, like, let's say, for example, you do this math and let's say you have 50 kids that you can have in your center, and you do this math based on what your fixed costs are and what your variable costs are, and then you come up with the fact that you need 55 kids to break even based on what your current price is. We know we got problems.
What a wake-up call that is.
Right. And so in reality, we generally, like, when I'm, let's say I'm working with a client on a new center that they might be opening, and they want to know if it's a good deal with the rent and all of that, what I usually look for is that the break-even point has to be at least at, like, I would say 60 to 65% full capacity or less, because you need room for profitability. If your break-even point is when you're only at like 90% capacity or more, that's never going to be a profitable center unless you're able to somehow raise your rates higher than what you currently have.
Okay. Good information. I hope everyone is taking advantage of this and finding it valuable. I know we've packed a lot of information there in this time period. I do want to give time for questions. So if you have any questions, you can either pop them up in the chat, and I see that we have a couple here. I'm hoping that, okay, so we've got some if you have any other questions about it, please feel free to ask away. You may have to unmute yourself. And you will receive some information afterwards, that kind of recaps all this. So that way you will have it, because it is as Rochelle said, it's very hard to talk about these numbers and not have that visual. So it may take some time and practicing with it. So the $1,000, where the $1,000
making up numbers.
Okay. Oh, gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, no, I'm like, hopefully everyone's tuition is more than $1,000 a month. I'm just trying to use even
simple
numbers to like make this as easy as possible. But
perfect. Yeah. Perfect. Okay, awesome. So, any questions, please feel free. I know for me, I want to thank you all for continuing to pop in here with us and spending a Monday evening with us. We enjoy sharing the information, and you can't tell, I'm very passionate about everybody understanding the numbers. And so please feel free to join that Facebook group to get the information that Rochelle was talking about. The post is pinned, so you have access to some letters to send to parents, you were saying, is also in there, as far as like how to increase your tuition. And we'll also send you some too. So if not, I know that our next webinar will be we're doing this the second Monday, right? Yeah, the second Monday of every month. So we will see you in September. We are going to talk about some cool Google features. And if you don't mind kind of giving us like a little 30-second about why you thought this was such a cool idea to talk about.
So I was actually talking, I can't go just do 30 seconds. So I talked to clients, and it's been really interesting. Some of the questions that I'll get, such as, should we invest in Bamboo HR? And, I'll ask, well, what are you going to do with Bamboo HR? And they'll say something along the lines of like, well, it's to like onboard and like create, like have training videos. And I'm like, well, $400 to $500 a month for that seems like a very steep price. And so I'll talk about like LMS, and which is like learning management systems that they can use for like much cheaper, be able to track where people are with their training, be able to upload videos, be able to do that. And one of the comments that has come up is, yeah, you really need to make sure you're talking about everything that because we don't know what we don't know. And so again, another thing that came up with that same client was, using Google Workspace, there's a portion of it. What is it called again? Do you remember?
Oh, man. I know.
Sites, using Google Sites. And we personally, because we use Google for our email and calendars and management and all of that, we decided to use Google Sites for our wiki. So a place that we could create to, put really good information up there. For us, it's, like how to get access to various banks and various payroll accounts and things like that, how to create rules in QuickBooks. And so it's really nice because it's very organized. It's just like its own website. It's searchable. So if somebody's looking for information on 401k, they can just type in 401k and they can find the information. And that was kind of a mind blower for that client. And I think, there's been a few other things that I've mentioned that Google Workspace can do, and you're not paying more, you're just paying for the email service, but it can do all of these things. And so
these value added benefits that a lot of people don't recognize. And that's, what I kind of like highlight, Bamboo HR, you got to recognize the reason why you are looking for. So when Rochelle asked that whole question, like, well, why would you be using it? It's to kind of understand, is there something that you already have that could also solve this problem? Not to discredit Bamboo HR or anything like that, and yada yada. But yeah,
Yeah.
so the whole Google
We just want you to
Workspace-
save money.
Yeah. I mean, when you're talking about a 1% profitability, you know, we got to take all that profitability that we can, right? So, all right. Well, our next conversation will be on September 11th at 7:30. We are really excited to share with you our non-accounting knowledge, I guess, our just our kind of like nerd knowledge. So we're excited to chat with you about that. And if you haven't already checked out the Facebook group, do so. And we'll see you here in a month. Thank you so much.
Thank you.